We are going to work our way into a deep dive into misadventures with our literature section this month. For English Digest, I'm Leah.
And I'm Mike.
And here we are looking at Don Quixote. Wow, he is a interesting character for a story. He is so confused in his universe, and that means instead of going on adventures, he ends up going on misadventures. And that's kind of the funny part of this whole story.
Absolutely. One of the more famous characters from literature and one of the oldest novels in the way that we think of novels in Western history and in European culture. Before that, of course, we had well-known books like the Bible being a very good example. But as an actual story, Don Quixote was written, I think, sometime in the 1500s. It's one of the older books out there. And it's been enjoyed by people. It's been adapted into movies and plays and all sorts of stuff. And there must be a reason, when people have been telling the same story, enjoying it, and learning things from it for 500 or so years. There's got to be something in there that can be entertaining to most of us. So we're going to talk about Don Quixote. We're going to talk about the very famous story that you would, of course, read in the book. And then we'll also be talking about sort of the meaning of the story. We'll get into a little bit of literature and, analysis of the literature of the story and the meaning and the themes and stuff. And we'll also learn about the very interesting author of Don Quixote, Miguel de Cervantes. Yes, we will be doing a lot of Spanish names. So this might be a good time to point out that as you read about it or even watch some of the movies, if you really get involved and interested in it, you might notice that people say this character's name differently a little bit. Don is sort of like Lord or Duke, I believe, in Spanish. So that's a title that he would have. And Quixote, Quixote, you might say it in a more Spanish kind of way. It really depends. So we're going to go with sort of the middle ground of Quixote. But yes, older people might, or older versions of the word might be pronounced Quixote. But I think now we try to do it in a slightly more accurate Spanish style. So let's get into the article. We'll find out all about Don Quixote in day one, and we're going to definitely find out why he is such an interesting character, and we're going to go on some of his misadventures. So let's check it out.
Let's take a break first, though, and let's listen to the whole article through one time.
While some might claim that chivalry is no longer important, Don Quixote would never accept such a notion. Coming from the beautiful countryside of La Mancha, Spain, he is actually Alonso Quijano, an odd 50-year-old gentleman. As a passionate reader of chivalric romances, Quijano is so inspired by these tales that he decides to take up the role of a knight himself. Convinced that he is meant to be a brave knight, he adopts the name Don Quixote and sets out to revive the age of chivalry. Quixote, mounting his weak, aging horse and armed with a rusty spear and a damaged helmet, sets off on a mission to combat justice and protect the innocent. Alongside him is Sancho Panza, a simple farmer whom Quixote persuades to become his squire. Despite often being puzzled by his master's grand delusions, Sancho follows loyally, drawn by the promise of governing an island as a reward for his services. Throughout their adventures, Quixote's vivid imagination blurs the lines between reality and fantasy, resulting in numerous humorous and absurd scenarios. Sancho is often left to handle the consequences of his master's peculiar actions. In a well-known episode, Quixote charges at windmills, mistaking them for threatening giants. He also confuses an inn for a castle, and, thinking the innkeeper is a noble lord, insists that the innkeeper knight him. Though they suffer numerous defeats and sustain various bruises, Quixote's faith in chivalry remains unshaken. He interprets these challenges as trials of his bravery, made up by imaginary enemies. Each person they encounter becomes a character in Quixote's chivalric tale, enriching their adventurous journey.
Our story today starts out with, while some might claim that chivalry is no longer important, Don Quixote would never accept such a notion. So this tells us a little bit about the character Don Quixote right away. He's full of chivalry, and chivalry is that courtesy, that belief in courtesy, honor, gallantry towards women, kind of the knight of the Middle Ages. You would think of that sort of time, like Sir Gawain might be going off to fight the Green Knight because he wants to do something to help society out of honor or out of courtesy. Knights were considered to be the guys who would go and do really good things, and they were supposed to be very chivalrous. They were supposed to be full of chivalry. For Chinese culture, I think of the Junren Zhidao sort of thing. It's the gentleman, right? You're trying to be good. You're trying to be honorable. And Don Quixote sounds like he's this kind of person. He thinks that chivalry is definitely still important. He comes from the beautiful countryside of La Mancha, Spain, and he is actually Alonso Quijano, an odd 50-year-old gentleman. La Mancha, Spain is an area that's a bit south of Madrid, kind of in the mountainy area, I would say, and countryside, as I said, beautiful countryside. And he is not Don Quixote by name. He is actually this other fellow, Alonso Quijano, and he's an unusual fellow. He's a 50-year-old gentleman and a little bit strange.
Yes, and he's definitely a guy with a rich imagination, a rich life in his mind. It says, as a passionate reader of chivalric romances, Quijano is so inspired by these tales that he decides to take up the role of the knight himself. Wow, he sounds like a lot of young kids who might kind of be wrapped up in superhero stories or something. He's a passionate reader of these types of stories. If you're passionate about something, it just kind of means you really love something. It's interesting to you. It gives you great joy. It might be a big influence on your life. If you're a passionate sports fan, not only do you watch every game if you can, you wear this team's t-shirt, you have posters of the best players on your wall. You might be one of those guys who even travels to another country, maybe far away, to follow his or her team. It means it's a big part of your life. Not only is it kind of a hobby and a pastime and an interest, but it's part of your character too. And the kind of books that he likes to read, this Alonso Quijano, are chivalric romances. These would maybe kind of be like those wuxia kind of stories from ancient China that people still enjoy today. Stories of heroes saving maidens from dragons, lords doing the right thing and protecting the weak and the poor from bullies and strong men and, this kind of thing. So he's kind of really wrapped up in this. He maybe has slightly old-fashioned notions of what men are strong and brave, and women are beautiful but weak and need protected, and, need protection and that kind of thing. But it is a big part of his life, and he is very inspired by these tales. So inspired, in fact, that he decides to take up the role of a knight himself. I'm kind of thinking of maybe some guy who's read too many Batman stories and he makes himself kind of a superhero costume, and he might even go out at night thinking, I'll go to the park, and if someone's robbing someone, I'll run over and save them. And usually that doesn't work out very well.
Doesn't work out so well, no.
You might get arrested by the police and people will definitely think you're strange. But for that person, it might be sort of living out their fantasy life, living out their dream. And this is the kind of thing that Alonso Quijano does. But of course, he can't go around saving people as just some guy named Alonso. That's boring. He needs a cool, brave name. He needs the name of a hero.
Right, so he needs to be Don Quixote. He is convinced that he is meant to be a brave knight. He adopts the name Don Quixote and sets out to revive the age of chivalry. Sounds very grand, all of it. Convinced means that you are absolutely sure. And convinced that he is meant to be this, all of that before the comma is modifying he. So it's describing something about him. What is it describing about him? Well, he is convinced, he's absolutely positive in his mind that he's supposed to be a brave knight. He knows he's supposed to be this hero for society. So he adopts, he takes on, he chooses to use the name Don Quixote, and he sets out, he takes off on his adventure. He sets out, maybe he gets on his horse and leaves the town to revive, to bring back to life the age of chivalry. If you think of the age of chivalry, you might think of the age of logic or the age of science. It just means a period of something. So age of chivalry, you need to bring back that period when chivalry was very important. And how is he setting out? Well, we see in this next paragraph, Quixote, mounting his weak, aging horse and armed with a rusty spear and a damaged helmet, sets off on a mission to combat injustice and protect the innocent. There's a lot in this little sentence here. I love this. He's mounting his weak, aging horse. When you get on a horse, you mount a horse. You can also mount a horse's head on a wall, which means to put it up on a wall, or deer's head on a wall, which means you put it up on a wall. But here, you're talking about getting up into the saddle of a horse or getting up onto the horse's back and riding your horse. And it's not just a regular horse, it's a weak, aging horse. So we see right away that, what we think of a hero or an important person doing is a little bit different than what's actually happening. This hero to be doesn't have a beautiful white steed or beautiful white horse that he's riding off on. He has a weak, aging horse, and his spear and his helmet are also in a little bit of disarray. So it's rusty for his spear, which means that the iron has oxidated and there's that kind of red dust that's on the spear. And that's normally showing when the spear is not going to be so good anymore. It's not going to be so strong anymore. And his helmet isn't in perfect shiny condition either. It's a damaged helmet. But he doesn't seem to be affected by this. It doesn't seem to be what he focuses on. He sets off on a mission to combat injustice and protect the innocent. And he has someone with him.
All right. So imagine a guy, instead of looking like Batman, he's got a bed sheet tied around his neck and he's wearing his mom's shower cap on his head as a mask. Like, I am Batman. No, you're a weirdo, is what people would say. But in his mind, he might look like, the Caped Crusader, the Batman or something. But clearly, he's kind of pretending. Yes, and he's not alone. This is actually really good that he's not alone.
Yeah.
Because I think this would be a very short book if he was alone. So alongside him is Sancho Panza, the real hero of the story, a simple farmer whom Quixote persuades to become his squire. This is basically a normal, simple guy who doesn't have kind of imagination running around controlling his brain. He's a pretty level-headed, normal dude. But he's a simple farmer, and Quixote persuades this guy to become his squire. I think in most depictions, Sancho Panza is described, sort of portrayed as short, round. He likes to drink wine. He's a little bit lazy, but he's definitely level-headed and sensible. And he kind of goes with Don Quixote. Now, Don Quixote, being the hero knight, thinks that Sancho is serving as his squire, and that would be an official position as the knight's assistant. The squire would be the person who takes care of the horse, who polishes the armor, who sharpens the sword, who basically is the servant, the manservant, the butler also of the hero, of the lord, of the knight. But in this story, it's actually more like Sancho Panza is there just as his babysitter to make sure that nothing happens to Don Quixote. And if there are problems, Sancho kind of jumps in to smooth things over, to kind of say, hey, he's a little cuckoo, but he's harmless, so just kind of let him pretend. And that is basically their relationship. It says, despite often being puzzled or confused by his master's grand delusions, Sancho follows loyally, drawn by the promise of governing an island as a reward for his services. So maybe he's not totally level-headed. He has his own little fantasies, but he is often confused or puzzled by Don Quixote's actions and his imagination, his dreams, his fantasies, this make-believe world where he's a hero, his illusions. Things that are an illusion are not real. It's something you might imagine that you're seeing. It might be a dream in your mind that has no real chance of working out. If you have a friend who really can't sing, but they're convinced that if they just get on that TV show, they'll win the contest and they'll be the next Ame or Jolin or whoever. You're like, you can't carry a tune in a bucket. You might say to that person, you have the worst singing voice and no sense of time and no sense of tone or anything. These are illusions or fantasies or dreams they have. But despite that, being a good friend, Sancho follows loyally. He's very loyal. He won't betray him. He's a good, true friend to the end, even if he knows his buddy is doing something kind of crazy or kind of silly. He'll just be like, all right, it's your choice. I'm your best friend, so I'm not running away from you. I might not agree with you, but I'm going to be here. I will stick with you to the end. And that's what he does. But there may be a slightly selfish reason. Sancho might be what we would say hedging his bets. He might think this guy is crazy. I'm going to go with him just to make sure that he doesn't get hurt. But part of his brain might be, what if he's not crazy? What if he really is a powerful lord? This Don Quixote is a real person, and he says he's going to give me an island for my own once he becomes, king of Spain. So Sancho Panza was kind of like, well, I got nothing better to do. I don't want this guy to get hurt, but hey, if it works out that he's actually a big hero, maybe I'll get something out of it too. So there's just another reason for him to follow along loyally as Don goes about with his adventures.
We're going to have someone we'll follow along loyally, and that is our Chinese teacher. Let's listen one time.
听众朋友大家好，我们今天开始连续3天要带大家看一本唐吉訶德这个小说。唐吉訶德大家都知道是不是很搞笑的故事，对不对？其实这个背后的是真的很多的主题可以探讨诶。那唐吉訶德到底是在讲唐吉訶德这个人，还是讲什么啊？其实他是有点讽刺那种所谓的骑士精神啦。但是这个唐吉訶德因为他这个作品啊，他这个作者是西班牙人，所以我们先看一下这个唐吉訶德在西班牙文当中到底怎么念呢？叫做 Don Quixote。Don Quixote。那当然我们刚刚说这个骑士精神是他其中一个很重要的主题，所以在故事第一段的第1句当中，先把 chivalry 骑士精神这件事情先抓出来。主角我们也知道了 Don Quixote 唐吉訶德，那一开始就告诉我们就是说唐吉訶德他不会接受这种观点。什么观点呢？就是说骑士精神已经不太重要了。到底什么叫骑士精神啊？其实骑士精神是那种中世纪欧洲上层社会的一种精神文明啦，而且骑士基本上就是国家的精英阶级嘛，因为他要保护教会啊，然后保护国家啦，所以基本上他的个人身份就是觉得自己比较优越啊，有一些很基础的道德啊、人格表现。他有一种尚武精神，跟日本的武士道啊算是蛮类似的。那这唐吉訶德呢，他们就觉得说，大家都说骑士精神不重要，可他不能接受这个观点。接下来要到第2句咯，这个唐吉訶德他到底是谁？其实他是来自西班牙的乡间，他的本名不是唐吉訶德，他本名出现在第1段第2句的地方逗点之后 Alonso Quijano， 这是他的本名，而且他已经50岁了呢，他是一个 odd 一个古怪的一个 gentleman， 一个绅士。不过在第1段这个第2句的地方，它是分词构句哦，不晓得大家有没有注意到 coming from 来自于，谁来自于啊？逗点之后的 he 指的就是这个唐吉訶德。那你说它是什么连接词省略呢？因为逗点前后的句子好像没有什么特别逻辑的关系，但是就是在修饰、在形容、在补充说明唐吉訶德他的一个身份背景嘛。所以其实这个分词构句就是把2种资讯集中在一起，变成一句话。你也可以说它是逗点之后 and 的省略。那这样子总而言之没有连接词，那句首呢我们就用动词 ing 型，而且主词谈的都是唐吉訶德所以一开始也不需要 he， 不需要唐吉訶德这个主词。好，那接下来我们就来到第3句咯。第3句还蛮重要，因为有一个特别的句型，逗点之后的 so that 我们把它抓出来。第3句一开始这个 as 是个介系词的概念。那因为唐吉訶德本身他是骑士文学的忠实读者，所以他对于这些故事深受启发，他决心成为一门，决心呢就成为一个 knight， 一个骑士。那我们刚刚说的 so that 这个句型在英文当中是如此的怎样，以至于一个结果产生，它是一个表结果的句型哦。不过 so 本身是副词的关系，所以通常后面修饰的是形容词啦，或者是副词。像我们在这个句子当中看到的 inspired 就是一个 PP 借过来当形容词的概念，它是如此的被启发 that 以至于产生一个结果，他就下定决心要成为一个骑士，而且他觉得当一个勇敢的骑士就是他本身的使命啦，他想要重建那种骑士时代的风采。同样在第1段的第4句跟刚才第2句一样，都是分词构句。 convinced 如果说是以人为主词的话，通常会说人 be convinced that 某个人被说服什么什么事情，某个人深信着什么什么，一样是 be 动词 being 的省略，这是分词构句。谁深信啊？逗点之后的 he 还是回到了我们的主角唐吉诃德，所以它是一个分词构句哦。就因为他深信他是注定要成为一个骑士，所以他就要 revive 这样子的一个骑士风采。好，于是乎来到第二段啦，你可以想象一个50岁的 gentleman， 有点怪怪的，有没有？他就骑着他的衰老的瘦马，配着一个生锈的矛，还有一个损坏的头盔，他就开始了一个征途啦。在第二段的第一句这边有关系子句的简化 Quixote 逗点之后的 mounting 一直到下面逗点的 helmet， 这边先左右括号起来。好，那他省略的当然是逗点之后的 who 因为这个唐吉诃德这个人 who mounts mount 本来他有这个登上什么交通工具登上什么台的意思，在这边就直接动词变成 ing。还有一个and 之后的 armed 这边也要抓出来，其实 and 之后有一个 be 动词 is 被省略掉了，其实 is 是变成 being 了我们说句子简化的 being 也会直接删掉，所以你会看到的就是过去分词 armed。 好，那这句话就很长啦，那真正的动词到底在哪呢？真正的动词是在 helmet 的逗点之后的 set off， 它就出发了。那这个骑士这么厉害的话，有没有一些侍从呢？有在第二句当中出现了一个配角，他身旁有一个 Sancho， 那个桑丘呢？桑丘他是一个朴实的农夫，他被说服成为一个侍从。那这里也有一个关系子句，不过还好呢，没有简化。我们看到的是 whom 一直到句尾，这个地方可以左右括号。那侍从这个字在第二段第二句最后面的 squire 这个地方可以稍微注意一下，因为我们毕竟这个骑士嘛，骑士旁边有个侍从，好像也蛮重要的关键字。好，接着呢，我们就谈到这个桑丘啦。桑丘为什么要忠心耿耿的跟随我们的这个唐吉诃德呢？其实因为唐吉诃德告诉他说，你就跟着我，那到最后呢，我会给你一座岛屿，你就可以治理那一座岛屿。所以桑丘就一直被这样子的一个 reward 这个报酬所吸引，那是一个 promise 那是一个 reward。 好，不过我们在第二段最后面这边的第三句这个地方也是一个分词构句逗点之后也是连接词省略，不过我们会觉得少了一个 because 表示一个原因，后面的 he is because Sancho he is 整个三个字都省略掉了， he is drowned by 他因为什么什么而深深的吸引，这边也是一个分词构句，连接词省略。
All right, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Moving into the next paragraph, it says, throughout their adventures, Quixote's vivid imagination blurs the lines between reality and fantasy. If you blur the lines between reality and fantasy, you don't know whether something's true or not. You don't know if something's real or not. And in our story, we're reading and we're like, okay, this Don Quixote guy, he doesn't really know what's real or not. He's a curiosity. And that blurred line situation results in numerous humorous, very funny, and absurd scenarios. Absurd being just really laughable, making you go, that's bizarre. That's so absurd. That's just something that nobody would expect to happen. That's so strange. Sancho is often left to handle the consequences of his master's peculiar actions. So he's left, dealing with the fact that his master, or the one that he is squiring, is strange. He's unusual. He's weird. He's peculiar. In a well-known episode, Quixote charges at windmills, mistaking them for threatening giants. I think right now the best description of Quixote is that he has the best of desires, but he doesn't really know what's real and what's not. I mean, if you think a windmill, which is like you see in Holland, all those big towering things with the fans on them that turn it with the wind blowing through them and create electricity and power that can be stored or can be used by a community. That's a windmill. We have them a lot in areas like outside of Los Angeles and California. The newer ones that are really tall white ones with the fans coming off of it. Those are more called wind turbines now. But back then they would have been those ones that you would think of when you think of traveling through Holland. Well, he thought those were threatening giants. The fella has a little bit of a disconnect with reality.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's actually a really interesting thing about this book. Written 500 years ago, it's kind of the first character that has mental illness, right? Don Quixote today would be described as mentally ill. I think he'd probably be given medication for his...
Or having Alzheimer's or something almost.
His hallucinations and stuff like that. But he is kind of a mentally ill guy going around, and his friend Sancho Panza's there just to make sure that nothing bad happens to him. It's kind of a sweet relationship, really. But that is definitely a good description of an absurd scenario. This old man on a horse who's got old equipment on this tired horse. In his mind, he's a great hero on this giant war horse with his gleaming armor. He goes charging at these windmills, thinking that they're dragons or giants and they're going to, capture the princess or something. And there's Sancho Panza chasing after him. Sancho Panza, I think, rides on a donkey just to make the image even more kind of humorous and comedic. Sancho's riding after him going, no, those aren't giants. It's just a windmill. So this is a kind of bizarre situation that happens. It says, though they suffer numerous defeats. Oh, sorry, I skipped a sentence there. It says he also, as another example of an absurd scenario, that's Don Quixote, also confuses an inn for a castle, a small roadside hotel, maybe restaurant, tavern, an inn. He thinks it's a castle. So the small house, basically, in his mind, Don Quixote's mind, is a magnificent, huge castle with walls and towers and guards and whatnot. So that's clearly not quite right. So Don Quixote thinks the inn is a castle, and he thinks the innkeeper, the boss of the inn, the owner of the inn, is a noble lord, is a very powerful, rich landowner, cousin of the king or something. And then he insists that the innkeeper knight him. So you can imagine all the people there just having lunch at the inn. This crazy guy comes in thinking he's a knight. And he says to the innkeeper, "Lord, I will ask you to please give me the honor of bestowing your grace upon myself." And he kneels down in front of the innkeeper and makes the innkeeper pick up, a soup spoon and touch him on the shoulders and say, "You are now Sir Don Quixote." That is what it is to knight someone, to sort of accept them into the service of the king. It's a very great honor, right? If you get knighted, even today, you can get knighted in England. The king might knight you. You become sir or dame, something like that. Usually because you've done a great service for the country. You've raised a lot of money for charity. You've done a lot of good works for lots of people. And you don't usually get knighted by the guy who owns the restaurant down on the corner, nor would you ask that guy who owns the restaurant on the corner to sort of, accept you into his royal noble service or something like that. So again, a bizarre scenario. It says, though they suffer numerous defeats and sustain various bruises, Quixote's faith in chivalry remains unshaken. So even though they have a lot of misadventures, adventures that don't go quite right, that don't end up, sort of showing them to be the heroes that they believe they are, they have some defeats, more than some, numerous defeats, and they sustain, or they, suffer, or they kind of, have imposed on them, have happened to them various bruises. A bruise is that sort of purple blue mark on your skin when you bump into something or fall down, right? If you fall off your bike, you might bruise your knees or something like that. So they get injured. They get, pick up a few minor injuries, as long as a few sort of embarrassing situations on their adventures. But Quixote's faith in chivalry remains unshaken. At no point does Quixote go, "What the heck am I doing? This is crazy. I'm going home." No. He thinks he's still a hero right to the very end.
And he interprets these challenges as trials of his bravery made up by imaginary enemies. I don't think he knows they're imaginary enemies. I think they're actual enemies to him, but he interprets, he analyzes and views these challenges as trials to his bravery. So he has to, deal with these challenges. He sees it this way, that these challenges are really to test his bravery. They're trials of his bravery. Each person they encounter becomes a character in Quixote's chivalric tale, enriching their adventurous journey. I do have to say, I have never in my life said chivalric before. I have said chivalrous. I have said chivalry. But chivalric is quite a unique one that comes out a lot in here, and it's a fun one to say when it rolls off the tongue. But this chivalric tale is enriching their adventurous journey. So they're dealing with all the chivalry. They want to be honorable. They want to be good guys. They want to be heroes. And that enriches this story. This makes it more rich. It makes it more vivid. It makes it more colorful. It makes it more interesting. It makes it more exciting. Much like what our Chinese teacher is going to say to us right now.
好，就来到了第3段啦，终于讲到故事的情节，到底发生什么事？当然，因为这个50岁的唐吉诃德怪怪的，但是他的想象力很生动哦，而且重点是他没有办法分辨现实跟幻想之间的界限，所以这个整个故事呢，情节就会变成有点荒谬。所以第3段就讲到为什么这个故事很有趣。在第3段当中的第一句，我们要特别注意一下。第一个字的 throughout 这个字是介系词哦 throughout 这个字是遍及的意思，遍及后面可以加时间，也可以加地点，好，就是在整个的这种概念，在整个的他们的 adventure 当中没有办法分辨界限，后面我们把这个片语画起来 blurs the lines between A and B。 blur 就是模糊的意思，他把现实跟 fantasy 之间的这个界限给模糊掉了，而这样子的一件事情当然就形成了荒谬情节啊。同样这句话当中逗点之后的 resulting 我们还原它是 which results， 可是要特别注意哦， which 在这里指的是逗点前面从句首开始的整件事情，整件事情也就是想象力，而且他想象力丰富，无法分辨现实跟幻想的这件事情，就造就了很多荒谬的情节。好，那接下来呢，我们就来到了第3段第4句这个地方。例如说啊，他曾经把一个客栈误认成为城堡，然后呢，他就一直想要请这个客栈的老板，因为他把他认成贵族嘛，他坚持要老板呢封他为爵士这件事情。在这句话当中，逗点之后的 thinking 我们可以特别抓出来，它也是跟刚才我们提到第2段第3句这个地方是同样的 because 省略的一个分词构句。逗点之后本来是 because he thinks the innkeeper is a noble lord， 连接词主词省略，动词变成动词 ing。 所以在这个故事当中，你可以想象这样子的一个50岁的一个自认为骑士的一个骑士，然后还带着一个 squire， 他们会屡屡遭受失败，遭受挫折。可是啊，很可爱的就是唐吉诃德对于骑士精神这种信念是坚定不移的，这就是故事好看的地方。所以我们明天呢，能够带大家还继续看一下唐吉诃德这个故事，还有我们说它有很多的主题可以探讨。我是安娜，我们明天见。
All right, so we have learned a lot about this main character from Miguel de Cervantes. Please join us again next time where we'll look a little bit more at Miguel de Cervantes himself, who is a very interesting man. For English Digest, I'm Leah.
And I'm Mike.
Take care.
Adios.